So this is the Affordable Housing Committee of April 14th, the regular meeting held via Zoom. It is 7:04 p.m. My name is Mark Barnhart. I'm the Director of Community Economic Development and the host. And we have with us tonight, Chairman Steve Grathwall, Commission or committee members Nancy Lyons, Carrie Mackover, Helene Daly, our recording secretary, Gretchen Gerthner. I believe we have a few members of the public. I do see Herb Limecooler from Fairfield Senior Advocates. If the other individual on the phone would like to identify themselves for the record on the chat, that would be fine too. And we also have Glenn Chalder from Planometrics, who is our planning consultant, hopefully, for the Affordable Housing Plan update. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Steve, for the agenda.
Thank you, Mark. And good evening, folks. I'm glad you all could join us. One quick question, Mark. Normally, I would say that members of the public can't ask questions. They can email them in, but because of the format. But if we only have one or two members of the public, are we able to relax that a bit at the end?
That's up to you, Mr.
Yep.
Chairman. If you want, okay. We could also entertain questions through the chat if you'd like.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of folks joining, so that, you know, again, that's at your discretion. Yeah.
Well, I like using the chat. Email's fine, and at the end, maybe we'll open it up to everybody. Okay. Okay. For the agenda, the minutes. Hopefully everybody had an opportunity to review them prior to the meeting. Could I get a motion to approve?
I move we approve.
I'll second it.
Any discussion, any changes? I will just mention one thing as a discussion. There were the affordable housing goals for 2021 were listed as promote the accessory dwelling units, update the affordable housing plan, and promote the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Those three are all very good goals, and they remain active and alive. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye, raise your hand. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Good. We're going to go now to one of our big goals for this year, which is to update our affordable housing plan. With us is a familiar face, someone we haven't seen for a while, but he was here 6 years ago, maybe 7, something like that, as we started to work on the update to our last affordable housing plan. Glenn Chalder is here from Planometrics. And Glenn, I don't know if you want to run through your planning for housing choices, or Mark, if you have a different way you want to proceed with this. I will say that what I'm hoping to get is, sorry, just a second. What are we going to do? When are we going to do it? And how can we help? So,
and I'll just add before Glenn provides his own introduction. Glenn has graciously agreed to join us this evening, even though he's not officially under contract, nor has the contract been officially awarded to him. We're in the process of doing that. I've talked to the purchasing agent. I don't foresee any issues with it, but our process does require, review of that by both the town attorney and potentially the Board of Selectmen at their upcoming meeting. And given the timing of this meeting and the fact that I know the committee is anxious to start work, I thought it would be helpful to just, if Glenn was agreeable, for him to join us this evening. And I know he had to resolve some scheduling conflicts on his end, but he was able to join us tonight. And I thought it would be a good idea to at least get the ball rolling. So Glenn, with that, thank you for joining us this evening, and look forward to hearing from you and working together once again.
I can't believe it's been 6 years.
I know, isn't it?
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Cheers, flies.
And I'm sorry, Joanne's joining us now in a second. So
Wonderful.
Oh, great.
So let me start off if I may. My name is Glenn Chalder. I'm a planning consultant.
I'm sorry, Glenn, can you hold just a second until Joanne is plugged in?
Certainly.
Yeah, Joanne is one of our committee members, so
Do we know who 203-331-5485 is?
I don't. And
Okay.
this is an open meeting, so
Okay.
you know, we're not going through the, you know, people have to call in this line and we have this
Right.
meeting going over here.
Yeah, this is much
Way,
easier.
way too confusing for me to manage multiple
Mhm.
simultaneously. It's not that technologically.
Mhm.
So with the town attorney's blessing, I was able to host this meeting on Zoom, which I know Carrie is very appreciative of.
Yeah. Me too. It's much easier.
Herb's signaling a thumbs up too. Joanne, are you able to hear? I hope.
Yeah, I don't know what,
She may be like Helene finishing up her
Yeah.
dinner, so maybe we can let Glenn go ahead, and I'm sure
Yes.
Joanne can hear. She just might not be.
yeah.
able to.
Glenn, thank you. Please go ahead.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Again, as I was saying, my name is Glenn Chalder. I'm a planning consultant. The firm I work with is Planometrics. Planometrics has been around for more than 6 years, we'll say. I've had a chance to work with a lot of communities around Connecticut, and one of the ones I'm kind of proud of is the chance to work with Fairfield, probably starting maybe 7 or 8 years ago with them on the housing plan. Fairfield was one of the first communities in Connecticut to adopt an affordable housing plan back in the 1980s, like I think it was 1988. And really recognized at that time the changing dynamics of the housing market and the way that it would affect communities, and really a bold vision for the 1980s in terms of how to address this issue. So the town asked me to help them update that plan, and I was pleased to do so. The plan was finished in 2014, and since that time, we had a kind of a top 10 list, if you will, of strategies and ideas. And I've in touch with Mark and Jim Wendt and Steve over the years in terms of the progress that's being made. And I'm really delighted to see the progress that's being made, because as I'm sure you're aware, housing is becoming an issue of even greater significance and importance in the state. So I think this is an opportunity for Fairfield to build on what has happened before and to look at strategies in terms of where we go from here. I'm actually kind of happy, if you will, at this point in time that we don't have a finished contract. And the reason is that at tonight's meeting, I wanted to introduce myself and hopefully accomplish two things with you, if we can, for this kickoff meeting. The first of which would be to kind of have just a discussion from each of the members, talk a little bit about yourself and what you hope to accomplish as part of this housing plan for Fairfield. And then I have, as part of the proposal, put together a general scope of work and schedule. And so what I'd like to do is walk through that with you tonight, and to see if it matches up to what we've talked about in terms of issues and concerns in Fairfield. And then I think Mark and I hope we'll take that information, tweak the agreement as necessary to make sure that we address and accommodate the interests and concerns that you have. And then I can get started working on the elements of the affordable housing plan. So how does that sound for a basic program for tonight? Is that good? I don't want to take the whole meeting because I know you have some other stuff on the agenda. But just a general overview of yourself, why you're on the committee, and what you hope to accomplish as part of this affordable housing plan. Anybody want to start? Go alphabetically, go top down, bottom up?
So I'll start. So I've been on the committee for a long time, more than 10 years. I worked in real estate. I've worked in affordable housing since I was a Vista volunteer 40 years ago. And what I hope we're able to accomplish is an updated plan for the town, one that recognizes today's needs, how to meet today's needs, and then some actionable goals. I'm not sure how Fairfield's ability to meet its needs plays into the larger regional or state needs. You know, the state has, as you know, Glenn, 830G, and it's a program that's had some success in some areas, but in Fairfield, we've had, to my count, 18 830G projects either proposed or in construction or completed, which I think has got to be triple any other community in the state. And that to me just seems odd that out of 169 communities, we be number one. And I want to make sure that Fairfield gets credit for the good things it's already been able to accomplish. And two questions for you. Is there an ideal mix in theory of how many houses percentage-wise a community should have versus how many apartments? Is it 2/3 houses and 1/3 apartments? Just in theory. And where did the 10% affordable come from? Should it be 10? Should it be 15? Should it be 25 or should it be 5? I don't know. So, sorry, that's my list.
Well, that's good. Thank you, Steve. You want me to respond to your questions real quick before we move on?
Sure.
So I'm not aware of any overall goal for the percentage of ownership units versus rental units. I think every community is a little bit different in terms of circumstances that they find themselves in, both in terms of the job market, but economically, their demographics and the changing housing needs. So I think the right answer is a mix for the community that meets the housing needs. Not just the housing needs in the community, but in the region that they exist. We all rely on each other for jobs, for housing, for recreation, for all sorts of activities. And so the question is, what really works for us in our community and in our region and in our time? Because one of the things that's kind of remarkable in Connecticut is the changing age demographics, the aging population, smaller households. There's more need, more interest for smaller units to kind of address that need, and other types of housing, lower maintenance, et cetera. So I'm not aware, Steve, of any magic mix. I think it depends on the community. I think the next question was, is the 10% state goal, I guess I'll call it, for affordable housing, the right number? Should it be higher or lower? I mean, that's another great question. I think there's quite a bit of history in Connecticut's adoption of the Affordable Housing Appeals Procedure. It dates to 1989, and followed up on some provisions that had already been adopted in Massachusetts with regard to this. In Massachusetts, I think it's called 40B and 40R. Those are their statutory references in terms of this particular issue. And I think if I understand the history correctly, the 10% goal actually started there and was transferred over to Connecticut. If we look at this statewide listing for affordable housing here, real quick, I think I can do the number here real quick.
31.
Man,
31.
no, I'm trying to think what the percentage is.
Oh.
So just,
The
Well,
overall
statewide,
percentage?
I think it is 10%.
Yeah.
no, it's actually higher than that, it looks like. So it's 174,000 units in the state of Connecticut over about 1.5 million housing units overall. So let me just do the math real quick. 174,208 divided by 1487, 891 equals 11.7% is what we have right now today in the state of Connecticut. I think the 10%, I'm going to call it a threshold. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a state goal. It doesn't mean that the state does have a goal for open space, how much open space they want townwide, but I'm not aware that anybody's ever called the affordable housing percentage a state goal. I think it's a threshold, and the threshold is whether or not a municipality is subject to the Affordable Housing Appeals Procedure. And so if you are above 10%, or you're able to get enough housing unit equivalent points that Fairfield is working on, you can get a moratorium, a temporary exemption, or get the 10% a permanent exemption from the Affordable Housing Appeals Procedure. And if you're below that, then you're subject to it. That may be one of the reasons why Fairfield is so popular, is because It's a wonderful community in a strong real estate location and situation, 3 train stations, desirable in many respects. And people might look at the opportunity here to build and produce housing. And because of the set aside composition in terms of the number of units that are required, it can be financially advantageous. But I think that's the situation as I'm aware of at this point.
Thank you. Let me just, not to quibble on anything, but, or be argumentative. I think Fairfield's a great place and that we should meet our housing needs. I'm not so much in favor of meeting the region's housing needs without more money and more planning. And if they come down with certain programs or regulations that affect Fairfield, but don't produce more housing in Trumbull and Easton and Monroe and Weston, well, that's not right. I don't want to meet their needs unless they're going to chip in and do something for us. So,
Understood.
so okay, that's me. So,
You gonna let somebody else talk there, Steve?
yeah. Yes, Carrie, come on, Carrie.
Um,
I didn't let the record reflect 20 minutes into the meeting and we're already trash talking each other.
Yeah, really. Well, let's see. I'm a member of this committee because maybe it's just a thing that happens to planners. We don't stop thinking about this stuff just because we're retired. We are always thinking about these issues. And as Glenn knows, I'm retired from many years in Westport, which was the last time I may have seen you in person. I'm not sure. And
Nice to see you again, Carrie.
yeah, nice to see you. But besides working as a planner in Westport for many years, I also worked in the IT office for many years and was responsible there for doing similar, well, anyway, it doesn't matter what I was doing. So that's why I'm on the committee, because I just find these fascinating and very much issues which planners like to think about, I guess. What else was I supposed to tell you about? Oh, things I would like to see. Well, as I think about affordable housing and realize in many conversations with people over the years here, this whole idea of smaller lots on smaller houses, its time has come. It came several years ago. And as I've spoken to people about pocket neighborhoods and some of the work being done by Ross Chapin, and they've seen the pictures. I mean, people, I've never had anybody who didn't like that. And I think one thing I would like to see us working towards, and maybe it's with the idea of creating more what would become naturally occurring affordable housing. I don't know that it's going to meet our 10%. You know, those, I don't know if it's going to fall into the 30, 60, 80% AMI, but it might at the 80%. But dealing with the idea that we need to return to a more, I want to say user-friendly, but that's not exactly the word I'm thinking of, but really small houses on small lots that work to create community and that are therefore more environmentally sensible, that are better for older adults, and really better for everybody, as long as you don't have a lot of small kids. But you know, people can live in basically 12 to 1,500 square feet, 2 bedrooms, 1 floor, many things that Ross Chapin is doing with his pocket neighborhoods. And with, I think that time has come, and we still may have enough smaller houses that are really beyond their lifespan in a way. They're built in the 50s. They're not particularly great. Maybe those types of things need to be thought about. What else can I tell that? What else should we know about?
That's excellent, Carrie.
Yeah, Carrie, let me ask a question of Glenn and Mark, a follow-up that, Mark, what's the smallest plot of land that we can do affordable or we can build residential in Fairfield? Is it 10,000 square feet or 5,000?
Oh, it's way,
Well, it's less than that.
way
Yeah,
less.
yeah, yeah.
And there are,
You got, I mean, and I know the residence B zone
Yeah.
by heart because I'm looking at it right now.
Mhm.
And you can do a duplex on a 9,000 square foot lot. So obviously you can do much smaller with other zones. So I don't know off the top of my head, but that's pretty easy to look up.
Yeah, and where I am, residents say, I believe 9,000 is the smallest lot, but of course, all this is constrained by a lot of the wetlands that we have and slopes and
But if
sewers
we
or not
found
sewers.
a lot up in Greenfield Hills that had, let's say, 5 acres, we could potentially chop it up into a bunch of 9,000 square foot plots, which
Well,
would be
you know,
for the,
yeah, you're now in the
I'm
AAA
talking
zone,
something
so
else.
yeah.
well, that would be 30 housing units.
I'm going to segue into some of this when we talk about Parkview, actually.
Okay.
So I'll wait.
So I'm sorry, so we should go on to Joanne or Nancy?
And Helene,
Yes.
Helene's up
All
there.
right, I'll go. So I'm one of the newbies. I've only been on has it been a year? I don't remember.
You feel like an old hand right now, for
I don't
sure.
know. I
You're a
lost
veteran.
track. COVID. Who knows what day it is anymore? But I've been a realtor for 24 years now. So I certainly have seen in my years, the need that people have and what they can't afford. And, there's so many of my children's friends who are, young married couples that can't afford to live here in Fairfield anymore, even though they want to come back. Or on the other side, the downsizers, they want desperately to sell their homes, but they want to stay here because their grandchildren are here and they love this town and they don't want to move to Florida, and they have nowhere to go. In listening to Steve and Carrie, it's heartwarming to me, because I think that even though we may have differences of opinion on some issues regarding affordable housing, I think at the end of the day, we all pretty much want the same thing. Maybe not in size and scope, but we do all want affordable housing. I just recently saw a video on the National Association of Realtors site, and it was a woman that was honored. I think it was in Illinois or Michigan, somewhere out there. And, she built what Carrie's describing, like a little, tiny homes village type thing. And the people that were interviewed, they were homeless veterans. They were single, older adults. It was just the most wonderful story to see these people finally having a home to call their own. And there was such pride of ownership in, doing flower boxes and gardens and communal gardening, and all coming together and taking care of each other. One woman was choking on something. She came out and the people across the street, ran over. It was like just a green area in between the houses. But I mean, everybody looks out for one another. And what I would like to see as a part of affordable housing is more home ownership, because I'm really kind of alarmed at the number of rentals that we are adding to this town. And I just would love to see more home ownership, because I think that's really where people take the most pride in where they live and how they take care of their homes. This woman, this realtor that I spoke about, she helped do this through grants and, other sources, private funding, but I would love to see if there's any way that we could do something like that in our town. And I think there's such a need for it. Yeah,
Helene, that was wonderful. Thank you very much.
you're welcome.
Joanne, do you
or
want to,
Nancy?
Joanne, do you want to go next, or Nancy?
I'll go. I guess I'm like, of this group, besides Mark and Steve, I have the most longevity and was here when that first 830G project was done. And I'm really kind of shocked that we're #1 in the state with 18, which is, I think, really shocking. But I had worked in Manhattan and would worked on some affordable housing programs through the city. And when we moved up here, I, like the rest of you, was kind of surprised that there was really the lack of affordable housing. But what I'd really like to see is have the town take some kind of control, so that we just have to succumb to all these 830G projects, whether it be through the pocket neighborhoods, ADUs, or other incentives. That's it for me.
Thanks, Nancy.
Mhm.
Joanne?
You're on
You're on
mute, Joanne.
Joanne,
I got to
Joanne,
get
you're
you off
muted.
mute.
Yeah, you have to unmute up at the top. Unmute your
do it, Mark?
microphone.
Can you
Bottom
unmute
left.
her, Mark?
Yeah, she's on mute.
Asked on mute.
And you can't unmute her?
I can't unmute her.
No. Bottom
Joanne,
left,
Joanne,
bottom left.
Lower
Joanne,
left-hand
the
corner.
lower left-hand corner of
I
your
got
screen.
There you go.
Yay!
It's a new computer. I don't know how to use it. I'm very old. The reason I'm on, I've been on a lot of committees like this, not in Fairfield. I was part of most of the projects in Norwalk, having served on the health department, on the city council, on building committees as far as affordable housing goes. And as you know, Norwalk has one of a larger amount of affordable housing as far as, actually, it's not affordable, it's more low income. But it has always been put into one area. And I was always of the belief that if you're going to have affordable and you're going to have low income housing, it should be put out throughout the town so everyone has the same ability to live and benefit from different benefits that are around the town. My biggest thing is I was born and raised in affordable housing in Westport, the very first one that was ever built. I won't tell you how long ago that was, but we were one of the first families there. And I think they're great neighborhoods. It's what they now call a pocket neighborhood. We had 48 individual homes, families ranging anywhere from 2 to 3 to 5 to 6 kids. We were more like a family, and I think it's a great idea. I'm not crazy about what's happening around now with all these 5- and 6-story buildings. I think that it's a way for developers to get in by using the 8-33. I think the towns need to focus more on putting neighborhoods that are good for children. These 1 and 2 bedroom homes don't serve for families, as far as I'm concerned. And if we're going to do affordable housing, we have to make sure that we encompass everybody. But basically, that's why I'm on, because I'd like to explore more ideas as to how we can accomplish this goal without having these humongous, I can't even tell you, to me, they look like Folsom Prison popping up all over the place, when we could actually have beautiful pocket homes and small neighborhoods that would actually benefit everybody.
Perfect. Thank you.
Glenn and Mark, if you would allow, since we have Herb here and Gretchen, maybe they'd like to say a word or two.
Sure. Herb, you can unmute yourself. Yeah, there you go.
I
Herb
did.
is on the Fairfield Senior Advocates, as is Carrie.
Yeah, nice to see you, Glenn. I remember you from 7 years ago, and great to see everybody else too. So you completely agree with Carrie's point on pocket neighborhoods, and we talk about that a lot in Fairfield Senior Advocates, and we're excited about the prospect of the ADUs. We know that many of them won't be, quote, affordable, unquote, in terms of being deed restricted, but they really serve as a form of affordable housing in terms of providing, housing that works, budget-friendly housing that works for people. And so I'd love to see that sort of concept be part of the plan, as well as other housing that fits the needs of our residents, whether it gets us to a moratorium or not, it still serves a societal need. So I'm hopeful that could be maybe part of the plan. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Margaret, Gretchen, I muted you.
Okay, I think I've been on the committee longer than anybody else. I precede Mark, I precede Steve Grathwall, everybody else. I've watched for a long time through articles and everything, innovative housing. And I think in New England, we are way behind, particularly with building housing where water flooding is a problem. There are a lot of innovative ideas that don't include raising houses 10, 12, 14 feet off the ground. So I would love to see more innovation used. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Gretchen.
Mark, come on.
Well,
Gonna hold
No,
you-
I'm just a staff person here, so
So,
I get plenty of opportunity to talk to you, so
There you go.
we'll keep going.
okay, can I say one more thing?
Of course, Carrie.
Sure.
The part I forgot was that I think what we significantly need to do is market this committee. We need to have a bigger web presence that's independently findable, that is not connected except as a link to the town website, because the town website is way behind where it should be and probably will never get there. We need to have things that Mark has started posting, you know, his directory, but we need to have a much more user-friendly, so that if somebody is Googling Fairfield affordable housing, they come up with a link to a website that would be this committee's, that would be much more user-friendly, and also that it would link to the affordable, you know, Carol Martin's affordable, the Housing Authority, both of
No,
those.
she didn't have a website.
She has sort of a website. She has sort of a, forget all that. I mean, she does, but it's for her development arm. She doesn't
Yeah.
have one for her committee. But there just needs to be a much better website that is easily findable through search and that has information.
Oh, ye have little faith. Come on. Brenda put some money in my budget for
Oh,
a
she
new
did?
website.
All right.
Yeah,
I didn't know
think
that.
I've-
I'm glad
I
to
think
hear
I've
that.
made it through the Board of Finance already.
Oh, good.
So
I am really
it still
glad to hear that.
survives, you know?
Okay, this shall survive. That's great. Okay.
I just don't want to be in charge of updating the town's website.
No,
I want that job.
I do not blame you at all.
I do think that's a wonderful idea, because I think there's quite a bit going on in the state right now with
Yeah.
regard to housing policy, housing issues, housing approaches. Each of the 169 municipalities in Connecticut is supposed to have prepared an affordable housing plan by June or July of next year. So there's a lot that's going to be going on, and I think people in Fairfield naturally are going to be interested, but I think people in general are going to be interested. So I think efforts that we can take to collect, collate, organize, and present well relevant information, I think is a great idea.
I will also add that one of the things Jim went and I talked to Glenn about is the need, especially as it relates to this affordable plan effort, to have a digital presence, to have a website that provides a storyboard that talks through the issues, educates and informs, raises key issues and gets feedback from the public.
Yep.
You know, so we will be working with Glenn to do that. Glenn is not going to he's not a web developer himself, but he'll provide, working with us, the content.
Great.
I'll find somebody, and we did carve out some money for that purpose specifically, which could form the basis for an ongoing digital presence after the affordable housing plan update.
Right.
Mark, are we aware of any other towns locally that have done this? that we can
Yes,
take a
well,
look?
that's why I saw one of my colleagues up in Farmington had done a very nice job. And I thought, you know, this is a great idea. We should be doing something like this. And,
Great.
you know, it's something we've talked about as a committee in terms of just making information readily available to the public in terms of, I just dealt with 2 inquiries today for people looking for affordable housing in town. And I have a ready-made response, but, you know, it's basically sending out links to their various websites. It would be good to have something more centrally located where people can find the information themselves. So I did address your question, Glenn.
Yeah, and I'm pretty excited about this opportunity because I think information is important here. And so I'm actually kind of glad that Mark is going to take the lead on coordinating the creation of the portal, I guess we'll call it. And I'm going to prepare information with the view towards how we can present it effectively. So I'm looking forward to that element of the project. I think if I may, Steve, what I'd like to do is move on to the booklet I prepared. And I think for a couple of reasons. First of which is this is called, and the title of it at the top, briefing booklet number 1. So this is in fact content that could start to go on the website as an overview of what it is that we're trying to do and what we're trying to create. But I think for tonight's conversation, what I wanted to do is provide an overview of the purpose of an affordable housing plan, just present some general information about reasons for addressing affordable housing. I find as part of my work that there are many people who have housing today. They live in Fairfield or in another community, and sometimes they're not thinking about the housing needs or situations of others. And I think, as Helene pointed out, we find people that want to downsize or are looking to change or modify their housing, and they're facing housing challenges as well. When we actually get into the census data and look at what's called housing burden or cost burden, it's staggering the number of households that are already paying more than 30% of their income on housing and facing challenges, particularly on fixed incomes, or perhaps they are living longer than they anticipated in terms of their assets, et cetera. And these are hidden housing needs in the community. They may live here today, but they're not housed appropriately or not housed the way that they might like to be, or perhaps have more affordable housing. And I think these are some of the issues that we can and should be looking at as part of our work here overall. In this booklet on pages 2 and 3, I put together just a quick overview of some things to kind of get people thinking about housing and housing needs. The first is what's called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this is an observation that people have different types of needs, and shelter is one of the most basic needs of all. And once they have shelter, they're now able to open themselves up and participate in new ways, in new parts of their life, until they get to the point that they're able to volunteer for local boards and committees, et cetera. And so I think when people start to think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and also in terms of their own life, where they've lived before, et cetera, their minds open up a little bit to housing needs and housing opportunities. So I wanted to share this information to get people thinking about it. And then also there are elements of the state statutes that require the municipalities to consider housing needs as part of their work on zoning regulations, as part of their work on plans of conservation and development, and now, of course, with the requirement to prepare an affordable housing plan. So this is really kind of meant to be an introduction overall for people who may 30, 60, 90 days from now, or even a year from now, say, what was that Affordable Housing Committee up to? And they can start to find this information and start to think about it. On pages 4, 5, and 6, I've started to lay out what I think could be a scope of work for us in terms of how we could approach the task of updating the 2014 plan. And what I'd like to do is talk through the various elements here that were first anticipated as part of the scope of work, and get your comments and feedback. If there are issues or concerns, this might be a place to talk about them so we can include them in the scope of work. Or if the task is so daunting that we're probably not going to be able to address that in our budget, then we can talk about that as well. So if you have it nearby, feel free to read ahead. But the first element of the scope of work is what I've here called scoping and researching. The basic idea is for us to have a kickoff meeting and for me to work with Mark and Jim and others at Town Hall to learn about the issues or concerns that people have, to collect and review information for the last, since the 2014 plan. I actually still have my files. I've already pulled them out of storage and started to look through them again. But to collect information that will help people in Fairfield understand some of the housing needs or situations, how demographics are changing, how housing affordability issues are changing, the issue about, again, naturally occurring affordable housing, and the types of units and situations, and what's called housing gap analysis, where we might have gaps between what people need versus what we have today. In December of last year, the State Department of Housing issued a guidebook for preparing affordable housing plans. And so we'll be using that as part of our work in terms of looking at housing and housing related issues. And we'll also be looking at the physical capabilities in the community overall. Item number 4 on this list in the scope of work is undertaking an online survey to get community input. If we were not in a COVID world, we had quite a bit of success last time by having public meetings that people attended and participated in. They were hands-on, really trying to involve people in understanding these kinds of issues and moving forward. But even with vaccinations and everything else, I think with the time frame of the study, I'm not sure when's going to be a good time to do that and whether or not people would feel comfortable doing that, even with vaccinations and other things. So the current thought process right now is to deploy a community survey to get community input. And I kind of anticipate that our next meeting, we might have the beginnings of a survey instrument that we can look at and ask ourselves whether or not it's going to collect the kind of information we think is important to us. And in the meantime, I, of course, will be reading through the reports and collecting other information. Eventually, this first phase would culminate in a summary report back to the committee to say, here's what we found. Here's what the issues or concerns are that have been expressed by people or the opportunity areas. And then we'd talk about that report because it would guide our work going forward. So in terms of scoping and researching and setting the stage for recommendations and things to follow, how does this scope of work sound? Does it sound reasonable?
Yes. I have a couple of questions.
Certainly.
Page 5, number,
Jumping ahead, aren't you?
There you are jumping ahead, Carrie.
Carrie, sit tight just for a minute. She's a planner. She's always thinking ahead. There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
count towns like.
But you know, one of the things that we do have to do as part of the state is do a needs analysis, and that's part of what Glenn mentioned. So this is, but staff can provide a lot of this backbone so that we don't spend a lot of time and effort and Glenn's precious resources doing this aspect of it. Although we do need, obviously, I think the survey instrument is something we talked about as a good way in this environment to get some information from the public as to what issues are they most care about as relates to housing.
Yeah, I've got a couple of comments on page 4, not page 5.
Go for it, Steve.
So the survey, I think we need at least 2, one early on and one later on, to get the reaction to what has been compiled. Getting community reaction, I'm not sure how to do it, Glenn, but those least likely to give information or to ask questions, Blacks, Hispanics, certain elderly populations. I don't know how we tap into them. First of all, we don't have many minorities in town to begin with. But so the least likely, I think we need to find a way to communicate with. And then the gap analysis and meeting our needs. Is it a moment in time, 2021, or does it, are we trying to meet needs for a 5-year period until the next plan, or a 10-year period?
It's a great question. I think there's a couple of things that are important. One of the things I did want to talk about as part of this element of the scope of work is the unfortunate time we find ourselves in terms of availability of data, of good data. The census historically has been a treasure trove of information, which is very useful in situations like this. The challenge we find ourselves in is that the 2010 census is already 10 years or 11 years old, and the 2020 census is delayed, and there's some questions about the methodology and I guess maybe not accuracy, but the usefulness of the results and when it's going to be available. The current indications are the housing survey is likely to be released in more detail after the deadline for preparing these plans. The only other source of information that's available, which is as comprehensive as that, is what's called the American Community Survey. It's a document which is based on, or a survey instrument, I should say, which is based on a very small sample of the population each year. And then those results are extrapolated out to the community as a whole. And the census results, or the data which comes from this survey, has margin of error associated with every response. And sometimes the margin of error is bigger than the number. So it's really a challenge right now to be able to say to somebody with a strong degree of confidence that our situation in Fairfield right now is blank. So I think the important thing for us to recognize is that we're dealing with a trajectory of information, and we can and should talk about trends and anecdotal information and other things, and use data that will help people understand these trends. But it's going to be hard for us to have really specific numbers on some of these key issues, or we're going to have to qualify them. I have been working with Stratford on their affordable housing plan. It's actually headed for adoption next month. And we spent quite a bit of time working around, talking about the census data, and finally came to the conclusion in the final report that we would park the information in an appendix in another document, but it would not be in the report. I'm not sure that that's always the right situation, but I do think it's important for us to understand the limitations we're going to have on the census data. Steve, getting back to your comment about 2 surveys, we actually do have 2 public participation elements in our scope of work. The first one is in phase 1, that's online survey. And then when we get back to page 6, you'll see that there's another community activity at that time. Our hope is that we'll be able to do something in person, because I think that's the way we get to a give and take dialogue. But if the circumstances don't permit that, or there's concerns about that, we could do an online or other type of.
And I think too, I'm hopeful that we, at that point in time, we can have an in-person workshop, but understanding that not everyone will come out to a workshop, no matter how convenient a time or location we make it. Just people are not available. They have other things. They live busy lives. So we may be able to supplement that, if we do the work with Glenn, supplement that in some fashion with another survey instrument, if we feel like we need to get additional input into that process.
And I think the key part of the second element, as Steve pointed out, is to try to get feedback on policies and strategies that we're considering. So that we don't want to move towards adoption without giving the community the opportunity to give us comments and feedback on the strategies that we're suggesting. That would be sometime later in the process. The second major part of the process overall is on page 5. And this is based on the information that we've picked up in the first phase. What's in the 2014 Affordable Housing Plan is to start looking at strategies to address the issues that we've talked about based on our discussion of the first report and other things. Look at town regulations and ordinances and other ways that we can housing and affordable housing in Fairfield. Prioritize the strategies to be the most effective. Talk through the different strategies, prioritize them as part of the 2014 plan. We moved towards kind of a top 10 list based on the strategies that we were talking about at that time. And I think the state's goal on a 5-year plan is to move towards, to get progress and action in motion in terms of addressing these issues. So rather than a plan that necessarily sits on a shelf, it's a plan that would involve a dialogue and incremental steps and moving forward and then recalibrating. Fairfield has accomplished a lot since the 2014 plan, and we can continue that progress moving forward. Questions, comments on page 5?
I thought Carrie had a couple.
Yeah, I did. On page 5, you just said potential best practices applicable to a town like Fairfield. And I was just wondering how you defined a town like Fairfield, or if there were.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think the issue is Fairfield ticks a lot of boxes in terms of its configuration in a ring suburb, right? You're adjacent to Bridgeport. But tremendous variety in terms of a coastal community and upland areas, et cetera. Strong fabric in the downtown area, infrastructure availability in some areas of the community. So I think there's different strategies that can work in different areas. I actually think that phrase best practices is applicable to a town like Fairfield actually came out of the original RFP. So I think that that's going to be something that we're going to work on to make sure that we come up with strategies that we think as the committee work best for Fairfield.
Okay.
On page 6 is the scenario and process where we're going to be preparing, revising, amending, improving, enhancing the actual draft affordable housing plan itself. So based on our inventory and research and scoping information, our discussion of strategies, we'll now move forward in terms of how to present this information. I think we spent quite a bit of time as part of the 2014 plan trying to figure out how to present the information in an effective way. We weren't really sure what the scope of that plan would be. I think to get to Steve's remark, any good plan would look well into the future in terms of the directions we want to go, and then set goals or strategies which are sort of at the edge of our grasp that we can accomplish within the next 5 years, and then suggest things that we can continue working on after that. And then as we update the plan regularly, we'll be able to monitor our progress and figure out how we're doing and what we can or should be doing in the future. I think the affordable housing plan is going to include goals, policies, and action steps and recommendations for regulation changes or programs or policies that the town can undertake. We'll work to refine the document to a draft plan that we're ready to share with others. I think as Mark indicated, last time as we worked on the plan, we met with planning and zoning. We had public meetings to get feedback and input from other boards and committees in town in terms of moving ahead. And I think it makes sense for us to do that again as part of this time, as part of this process. The statute that guides our work, 830J, isn't perfect. Right now, the language in the statute says the municipality shall adopt. And the 169 towns in Connecticut are all kind of scratching their head about what that really means, because every town's a little bit different. The guidance so far from the State Department of Housing is look at your charter, or figure out who this should be. And I think it would be much clearer if it said the Affordable Housing Committee, or the council, or the selectmen, or the RTM. We don't really know who that is yet. We're going to have to figure that out as we go. And the only reason I bring that up at this early stage of the process, it's probably important for us to start thinking about who that might be, and to make sure that we bring them into the process, so that when the plan shows up for adoption, that it's been vetted, it's received community input and guidance, and we can be comfortable moving forward with that.
I just have a couple thoughts. By ordinance, by code, the Affordable Housing Committee is tasked with developing strategies with respect to affordable housing. So that's principally within this committee's wheelhouse, and has to report annually to the RTM on what it's doing in that regard. But also, similar to the last time we did this, and the Affordable Housing Committee in 2014 adopted a plan and then presented it to the Board of Selectmen, who tasked the Affordable Housing Committee with updating the plan. Similarly, this year, the Board of Selectmen has done the same. So while the Board of Selectmen did not adopt a plan, they accepted the plan as adopted by the Affordable Housing Committee. So I envision a similar process this go round, given where we are.
I think that makes sense to me, Mark, and I think that that simplifies the process quite a bit in terms of how this process would unfold. So good.
Now, obviously, as you mentioned, in order for a plan to be effective and to have action steps that you can actually implement, you need to have broad participation and buy-in support from other groups and boards. So I think, taking what we did in 2014, that was a lesson I drew from that, which was the consultant Glenn wasn't out there doing presentations to various neighborhood associations and other groups all the time. It was myself and other members of this committee that were doing that with content provided by the consultant. So we can be actively engaged in that process to make sure that we're making this information as available as possible and inviting the public to take part in it, actively engage in it.
Mark, a question for you on that. If the Affordable Housing Committee and you were to try to meet with other people during the time of COVID, could we rely upon you and your Zoom and that you could record?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, and I've accepted every invitation that's been extended thus far on the topic and left, and Herb can attest to this, and with the Fairfield Senior Advocates left with the closing statement that the Affordable Housing Committee is undertaking an update to its affordable housing plan. You're invited to take part in that effort. So, the process has begun in terms of outreach and engagement.
And if Herb has a recording of that meeting last week, maybe he could ship it to Glenn, because you did a good job, Mark, and it was good information. So.
We'll definitely do that, absolutely, and make sure if the committee members don't have that, we'll make sure the committee members all get it as well, for sure.
Thanks.
I think the last thing I wanted to go over really quick was the anticipated schedule. We're headed in towards the summer. It's generally, I think, not a good idea to try to do public community participation exercises, whether it's survey or meetings or anything else. So at this point in time, the schedule is set up that the goal would be, I think, for me to start the research and analysis in terms of collecting of data, et cetera. That our meeting next month would be to look at a survey instrument, refine that so we can deploy the survey in June. We can talk about the survey results and the other information at a meeting in July. In August, we could talk about some strategies into September. And I think at that point in time, have a draft housing plan ready in the fall. And look to get community input and feedback through the fall. And then I think the actual adoption process would likely fall in early 2022. And I think it seems silly to say this, but I think we're working around the summertime and then the Thanksgiving to Christmas period as being windows we'd like to try to avoid. So the events have been sequenced sort of in that window. So the schedule can adapt and change as circumstances change, et cetera. But I think looking at the scope of work and the months in front of us, I think this schedule works well. Any other questions, thoughts, comments on scope of work or schedule? Can Mark and I go ahead with these elements as part of the overall agreement, or any tweaks or changes you think are desirable?
And the only thing I would add to that, Glenn, is as we get into, once we're through the survey, we can be spending the months of June and July doing engagement with neighborhood associations, its groups here in town, other stakeholders in a variety of different forms, whether it's a pop-up events at the farmer's market or in front of a grocery store, all with the intent of providing information and making sure we're engaging with people to get them actively involved in the process when we start developing strategies in the fall.
Yep.
And so I think this looks really good, Glenn. The only thing that I would request and maybe mandate is that in the update, you give recognition to the goals that we've accomplished from the last time. There were 11 goals that we set out to do. And other than the 2 moratoriums for 830G, we've basically done everything. And that should be acknowledged, should be celebrated. And it's a good way to lead into the next plan and the next set of goals.
I think that's an important point. I think that the conversations about housing can be concerning to people. They don't always react well, but I think if we're able to point out that how much Fairfield has accomplished since the 1988 plan and the progress that's been made, and people recognize it's still a wonderful and great community and we've accomplished all of these things, I think will help people see that we can address those things. So Steve, I think that's a great point, and I'll make sure we take care of that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. I know you have other things on your agenda this evening. I'm gonna, I guess, hang around and watch and listen and see what happens as part of your work. But I'm looking forward to working with you and with Fairfield again. So thank you for this opportunity, and I'll work with Mark, and I'll be participating next month. So with that, unless there's anything else, Steve and Mark, back to you.
Thank you very much, Glenn.
Thank you, Glenn.
Okay, so let's move on to Parkview Commons, the Navy housing site. Mark, you want to walk us through your memo and your plot plan?
Sure. I think we've covered this, multiple times in the past, so everyone should be familiar with the development we're referring to as Parkview Commons, also known as Fort Devens, also known as the Navy housing site off of Reef Road. And the town acquired this property back in 2004, 2005, in that era from the United States government. Was previously used to provide housing for military personnel and their dependent family. It was improved. It was a roughly 6-acre site, improved with 28 single-family homes dating back to late 1950s. They're slab on grade, fairly modest construction, 3-bedroom, 1-bath units. Not the most energy efficient dwellings, but they obviously serve their purpose. When the town acquired it, was the intent to retain and subdivide the parcel into individual lots with covenants and restrictions in place as to resale and income limitations, so that they would be starter homes, affordable home ownership opportunities for persons when households earning 80% of the AMI or less. 4 of the lots were sold, the units torn down and sold to Operation Hope, which then built 4 duplexes or 8 units of permanent supportive housing off of Jarvis Court. The 2 lots closest to Veterans Park, those units were also torn down. That was added to Veterans Park as additional open space. So we were left with 22 units that were then sold through a lottery process to income eligible first-time home buyers with those restrictions in place. And that went pretty well, I think. I know some of you were part of that process. It was a pretty heartwarming scene to watch people earn their little slice of the American dream and have their first opportunity to own their own home. But the property was and is situated in a flood zone. Part of the allure of this neighborhood is the fact that it's conveniently located halfway between the downtown and the beach area. And real estate in this neck of the woods in Fairfield is pretty pricey. So this was a unique opportunity for many folks. We did then have a Superstorm Sandy, which brought into stark relief the flood zone issue. While the individual properties or buildings didn't sustain significant damage, the property, like many other properties in this area, did flood. I mean, the lots and the streets and such were flooded. And more importantly, in the wake of that storm, there was an effort to try to, bring into the flood insurance rate MAC program more money to offset the risk. And so folks saw their flood insurance premiums go up pretty significantly. And that obviously has pretty the significant consequences is the long-term sustainability of this development. And at the same time, when the units were sold, they were sold at the upper end of the price range that would make them affordable to first-time income eligible homeowners. And to provide for some equity in the process, there's a formula on resale that's pegged to CPI. And CPI has increased more so than income. So housing costs have gone up at a rate higher than income. And as a result, we find ourselves, or the folks that own those units find themselves with a shrinking pool of potential successor buyers. And so for those reasons, but mostly the flood insurance issue, we have been talking to the homeowners there about possible alternatives. And we actually advanced previously an effort working with a nonprofit housing developer a few years back to repurchase some of the individual lots, rebuild those units as duplexes. This was predicated on our ability to secure some financing from the state. We were not able to do that, and the entire exercise fell apart. So hope springs eternal. We have a similar situation now. We actually did with your support, and a couple things that have happened since that last effort. One most important development is the fact that we now have a housing trust fund and money's in it to help finance these types of initiatives at the local level. And we're not so exclusively dependent upon state or federal financing for these types of projects. So with your blessing, we did purchase 350 Quincy Street when given the opportunity. All these covenants and restrictions do provide the town the exclusive right to repurchase the units upon being offered for sale. And so we did buy 350 as a down payment with the intent that we might be able to secure additional properties nearby or adjacent to that would allow us to move forward with the development plan. Where we are now is I have two signed binders of sale for 2 units, 362 Quincy, which is adjacent to 350 Quincy, and 385 Quincy, which is directly across the street. We recently conducted appraisals, and I have submitted an offer to 336 Quincy, which is on the other side of 350, and 409 Quincy. We have completed an appraisal there. So all these units were homeowners that had expressed an interest in selling their units if provided that opportunity. I have also highlighted 376 Quincy. That property, the owner there had some financial difficulties and was in bankruptcy, and there was a foreclosure action pending, which was stayed because of the bankruptcy action. And while I've not been able to reach the attorney representing the court or the lender, I'm hopeful that we might be able to come to terms with regard to that. I also highlighted 320 Quincy with the thought that that might also be an opportunity. And I was led to believe initially that there was interest on the part of the homeowner to do that. I just received word last night, in fact, that he was withdrawing his intent, was not interested in selling at this time. So I'm going to take 320 Quincy out of the process. So the one thing I will note that many of these units that I'm talking about are conforming duplex building lots as they stand now. And in a Residence B zone, you need 9,000 square feet to have a conforming duplex building lot. I believe that without some level of subsidy, either at the local level or state level, we probably have to build more than a duplex, probably a triplex, in order to make the numbers work from a development standpoint. I've run a development pro forma, and if we're trying to not only preserve the existing units, but also add additional units of affordable home ownership here, You're talking sale prices in the low to mid 200,000. And it simply doesn't work with the land acquisition costs that we're talking about, construction costs, which have gone up in recent years, or in the last 12 months. So, I think the possibility of getting a subsidy does exist. Those are the ways in which you basically have two ways of creating affordable units here. Either you provide for more density than you otherwise would, which reduces your cost, your land acquisition cost to a point where it makes sense, or you provide some level of subsidy, either in the form of market rate units that offset the cost of the affordable ones, and which we know of, or you provide some type of governmental support. Typically, it's a federal or state grant, but in this case, we have local housing trust fund monies to do that. So I think my conversations with the Commissioner of Housing indicate that the State Department of Housing, despite their previous reticence to participate in this project because it was in a flood zone, they may be taking a different look at this now because this is a good opportunity, a good test case to provide the types of affordable home ownership housing that Helene was talking about in a high opportunity community. And so my pitch to the state has been, well, put your money where your mouth is. You talked about creating affordable home ownership opportunities, affordable housing opportunities in high opportunity communities like Fairfield, but you fund projects predominantly in urban areas. And then you decry the fact that suburban towns are not doing their fair share. So I think that does seem to strike a chord, at least with this commissioner, and she seemed very interested in taking a fresh look at this, which is certainly good news. So what I'm asking for tonight, what you did previously was you authorized $295,000 from the Housing Trust Fund, which we then used to purchase 350 Quincy. I've asked bond counsel and the town administration, the first select woman, whether we can issue a short-term debt instrument, basically bond anticipation notes, which are typically they're flipped into a long-term debt obligation, a bond. So we're issuing general obligation debt on behalf of the town, and we're using the Housing Trust Fund money to pay the note, to pay the interest financing charges associated with the note for up to 4 years. At the conclusion of which, we have to pay off the principal, and the principal repayment would come from resale of the units, either the existing units with some improvements, or hopefully upon redevelopment, the new units upon sale as a result of the development. So I'm not asking for an additional allocation. It's really a clarification of the intent, which I think was the intent of this committee all along, was to try to use the Housing Trust Fund monies to leverage, a bigger pot of money that can be then used for this purpose. So the idea is, can we put together a $2 million pot of money, a note, and I'm just using $2 million to start with because the numbers have changed a little bit in terms of the number of lots that might be potentially available. And the interest and carrying costs on an annualized basis for a $2 million note based on the town's borrowing cost is $50,000, probably less than $50,000. So 2%, which the town typically beats. No one can borrow money cheaper than the town, a AAA rated community. And right now those costs are less than 2%, but 2% is $45,000 a year on a $2.25 million note. So the $295,000 that we already allocated should be more than adequate to pay the financing, interest, and carrying cost on a $2 million note that would be sufficient for us to purchase all the properties I just mentioned. Then go out and secure a development partner that can work with us to build new housing at the correct flood elevation, add more affordable home ownership units as part of the process, and upon resale, pay back the monies that the town put out to acquire the property. And that's how we would essentially retire the note. Now, the risk to the town, or to more specifically to the Housing Trust Fund, is in the event that we're not able to realize through the sale the $2 million that we laid out initially. The Housing Trust Fund money has to be there to provide a backup to basically cover that. And that would be the subsidy that we would provide in the deal. So at this point, I'm not asking you to sign off on all the details. It's just simply permission to take the 295, roll it into, or use it as the collateral to borrow the money. This will still have to go through the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and RTM to approve the note and to approve the development plan and the acquisition of the properties. But, you know, we had already allocated 295 to buy 350 Quincy. I'd like to take that money, get it back from and through the issuance of the debt, and then use that money each year to pay the interest on that note until at the end of the year we repay the full amount. I'm sorry if that was way too complicated, but I just wanted to.
It's a good background.
Okay.
So you just answered my question, because I was going to say, didn't we use the 295 to buy
We did.
350 Quincy? But you're saying we're going to get that back from the $2 million.
So,
and then we just,
so Steve and I had this conversation beforehand. So Steve wanted to make sure I wasn't asking for new money.
right.
I,
It's just,
I went back and forth on this. Originally, when we talked about this, the idea was, geez, you know, instead of paying 295 to just buy one property, can we use that money to buy a whole bunch of properties? And the only way you can do that is to borrow the money, right? And the only way you can do that is to get the approval of these other boards. We didn't have time to get the other boards in line and close on 350. I'm now trying to go back and redo that process, but I do need to have bond counsel say that that's okay.
okay.
I'm meeting with him tomorrow to talk about that. So assuming that he signs off on it, says it's okay to take the money we already laid out, put it back in the Housing Trust Fund, and then use it to pay the interest on this note. That's the plan I'm presenting to you tonight for your approval. If he says no, then I'll have to come back to you once more.
So we didn't buy 350
You
Quincy.
did. We did buy 350.
We did. Okay.
We own it. Yes.
Okay. That's what I thought.
We have a holdover tenant that is paying rent to us.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. To mark a couple of technical points, the 295 goes back into the Housing Trust Fund. And then on a monthly basis, 5,000 comes out or something like that.
It's actually an annualized payment, as I understand it.
Once a year.
That's what the CFO told me. So.
Okay. And that annualized payment is going to be less than the new money that we get into the trust fund based on historical collections.
Yes.
Yeah. And then will the trust fund be guaranteeing the deficit legally in some language, or that's just the understanding?
That has yet to be determined, but I think we'll probably need to provide some level of guarantee to the other boards. I'm certainly going to make that assurance to them with your blessing, of course, but you know, I think that's why the Housing Trust Fund exists, is to cover that gap if there is a gap.
And at some point, you may want to come back to us and talk
I
about.
absolutely have to. I absolutely have to. I think there's too many moving parts right now. And the issue that I have is I can go individually to these. Every time we acquire a piece of property, I have to go to at least the Board of Selectmen, RTM, and Planning and Zoning. If it involves financing, I have to go to the Board of Finance. If it involves the Housing Trust Fund, I have to stop here. So to do this one by one is painful, to say the least. So what I'm trying to do is lay out the plan and get some overall understanding and agreement on the plan with an allocation that I can work with the individual homeowners at their time, because each one is, you know, they're trying, if they're going to sell their house, they have to find some place that they're going to move to. in a hot real estate market, that's not easy. Some are planning to relocate out of state because they're at that point in their lives where they want to do that. But what I found is that they're all working on their own individual timelines. So I have some people that are like, they're ready to go tomorrow, and others that are really interested, but they need more time. So I'm just trying to figure out a way where I can do it in the least amount of steps. And I don't know if this will work because it is a little, it'll work in terms of getting the other boards to sign off on it. I think it makes sense to me. Hopefully it makes sense to you. And hopefully it'll make sense to others, but there are some things that you can't, that are not knowable at this point in time, unfortunately.
I like the sounds of this, Mark. Because one of the biggest components of building, housing that is going to be owned by the residents eventually, or tiny villages, pocket neighborhoods, that kind of thing, is the cost of the land. It makes it prohibitive for us to, to find these types of situations. So I like this idea. How many units are we talking about purchasing?
Well, I think we're talking about purchasing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up to 6.
And
not all of which are contiguous. You can see there's 2 across the street. I know the one in between is not interested in selling, but there is an opportunity to kind of land bank a couple of these and then do a second phase, or even, if we're doing duplexes, we could do them right on those particular lots, because both are conforming lots.
This is just, I have no idea if this is even doable, but in terms of building them and developing them, is this something that we could appeal to, say, like a Habitat for Humanity type of developer, that, or even just rallying all the builders that we have in this town?
Yep.
That, I would personally, reach out to some of them and say, what can you give us? Let's form a local coalition of our own little Habitat for Humanity. I think that's doable.
I love it. I think, we did something like that on Greenfield and Nordstrom Street, where it was, for many years it was called sweat equity housing, because there was a sweat equity component to it, where individual homeowners, similar to the Habitat model, took some responsibilities, the sweat equity, to finish some of the houses.
Mhm.
So I do think there is a possibility to do that. I would open.
Yeah, this is
any
an
solutions
opportunity
like
for them to give back. And, there's been so much negative, commentary on social media about, oh, these builders, they come in and do this and do that, and they're, and they're building these McMansions. Well, now it's the time for you to give back to your community that you've made millions on in the beach area and other, parts of town. I think we could really get a group together that would, we'd put some pressure on them to really kind of give back to our community. I'd be more than willing to work on that.
Thank you. That would be great.
I think it's a great idea. And Helene, specifically regarding Habitat, I spoke to the woman who's the new head of the Habitat, and she was very interested in talking about this. But because of COVID and because she's in the midst of doing her own strategic plan for Habitat, we couldn't get together. But when the time is right, I'll bring her down to talk with Mark, and I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, and so the point is, it doesn't have to be the same developer doing all of them, because that might be too big of a job to ask anyone to do. But, we've certainly seen whole new neighborhoods go in where there's, 3 different builders involved in one neighborhood. So, I think it's a good,
In some respects, that may make it actually more attractive.
exactly.
More diverse looking type housing. So,
Right.
But I'm thinking, when we start talking about, small houses and pocket neighborhoods, this might lend itself to something like that.
Yes, I think it's a good start.
Yeah, Mark, as I was looking at the site plan and thinking there may be a couple of lots, maybe you can pick up one more unit than you thought. You start merging lot lines, and There's.
Yeah,
it
yeah, I
happens in
think,
Small developments like
Yep,
that.
yep.
So, yeah. Good.
I think we need, definitely I anticipate that we'd have to redraw the lot lines. I
Yes.
think what we're anticipating is that the town retains ownership, or some entity retains ownership of the underlying land, similar to what we did with Greenfield Nordstrom,
Yeah.
and do a ground lease for $1. And so then the owners own the improvements are situated on that, which are based on a 99-year, ground lease type thing.
Yeah.
So we
There
have
was something
permanent,
just,
but there's a common ownership.
yeah.
I've come around to that thought as the Greenfield Nordstrom, there's no perfect solution when you're doing affordable home ownership. It's a different animal. It's obviously sorely needed. We have 45 units here in town. This is roughly half of our inventory here. But with housing prices the way they are, there really isn't, that many starter type homes that people can buy in Fairfield anymore. And so this does provide, that initial step into home ownership for those that are making that jump. So I think, anything we can do to keep that cost down and keep that opportunity available is something that we should look to do.
But that's not part of this motion at this time. So,
No, I mean, and I just, I came up with something that I think expresses, I'm willing to entertain, but it's really, and I didn't want to get too legalese or complicated, but that's really a restatement of what would the intent of the monies is, how it's to be used. And so I just want to make sure that we capture that and explain that to all of you.
well, then in the interest of moving this along, I'm going to make a motion that
Well,
we
Wait a second.
reallocate 295,000 from the Housing Trust Fund to facilitate the purchase, acquisition, and redevelopment of properties within the Parkview Commons, former Navy housing development, as identified by Mark, knowing that it's changed slightly from the map he gave us.
I'll second it.
A question then, Mark. Is it 295 you're asking for, or is it 300?
Right.
It was 295. I went back and looked at the minutes. It was 295 that I asked for, and that's what we used. So I would,
You would
that
stay
was
with the
my
295?
mistake when I drafted. I rounded up. So
Okay.
Is there, we talked about a guarantee. Is there a guarantee attached to this 295?
I think what I need to do is
Because
if
we
you're,
need to quantify that then.
if you're, I mean, I think we've covered that. If you understand what the intent here is, when I
Right.
explain it to other boards, I can crystallize that I intend to come back. Obviously, we meet monthly,
Right.
and
right.
I'll make sure that we, if we need to make further clarification on what our intent is, we'll do that. But
Okay.
I think this will be sufficient, at least get the ball rolling.
Okay.
I want the committee to know that we might have to do some meetings in between our regular meetings to meet with schedules or calendar dates that Mark has to rely upon or get something done by. So if he needs us to approve something in addition or to change our motion later on, we'll do that as quickly as we can, even if it means meeting, in between our regular meetings. Okay, but we'll do it by Zoom or, phone call. So we have a motion and we have a second.
Yes.
Any more discussion? Seeing no hands raised. All those in favor say aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? Seeing none. It passes unanimously.
Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Harry,
Wish me luck.
Yeah. It's a complicated process.
I don't know why. Sometimes I wonder why I'm doing this, because it seems to.
Forge ahead. Forge ahead.
Forge ahead, right? Yeah.
Harry,
Yeah.
would you email that to me, your exact wording?
I think
Yeah,
it's
it was from it was from the agenda, pretty much.
I think it's
read
in
off
the agenda. Yeah.
Or not the agenda, but his it was pretty much the exact wording that he had on his Parkview report. I just added that we understand the map's been modified.
Yes.
Yeah.
as revised, and then we could put 295 instead of 300. So I
Yeah.
thank you for that clarification.
Good.
Okay.
So moving on to accessory dwelling units.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank Colleen and Joanne, who sent me some really good questions. And I started drafting some responses to those. These were the ADU questions. And then I realized, I went back and looked at the Ridgefield report, and I said to myself, there's no way I can pull together a whole report like Ridgefield. And so, Steve, I was wondering if you could talk to the chair of the Affordable Housing Committee of Ridgefield, Dave Goldberg or Goldenberg. He was
Yep.
so nice. I mean, they have a good document.
Yep.
And the question is, can we either take their document, adapt their format, but basically plagiarize a lot of it legally by asking him?
Yeah.
And if he's willing to let us just swap out some information and use that. It's really almost too long, but it's a start at least, and it's pretty well done.
And
If
I,
we can't do that, if we can link to it. And
I think that's a great suggestion. And I wouldn't worry too much about it's the content that's important that you guys need to help develop, and we can pretty it up. I mean, I have
people who can do that.
some folks that I work with that do graphic design, and they can lay it out and put the pretty pictures and stuff like that
Yeah.
associated with it. So, but I think this is a good start. And I think, contacting Ridgefield, no sense to reinvent the wheel.
Oh, no,
was
there
just gonna
really
say the
is no
same.
sense to reinvent. A lot of this stuff is very similar town to town. Is yes, the content changes, the departments you see change, that type of thing. But theirs was very thorough. And then if you want even more thorough, you can look at what California does. We can't do that yet, but Ridgefield's at about the scope that we should be able to pull off. People should download it. The other thing I did to do, we don't have a date yet for the ADU big conference or whatever it is we're planning to do at the end of April, which is almost here, so it's too late. So sometime in May. But I did speak to Linda Batchelder, who's a local architect, and she did say that she would be willing to be there as a local architect, be helpful, and she has had some experience with ADUs. So that's one possibility. And I've I've fit all this in as I could. So that's where we stand with things.
We have an attorney that we've identified that maybe could help us as well.
We talked about an attorney, but I didn't speak to any. I think we talked about doing it, but that just went over my head. It's the hat.
I think we can probably identify an attorney
Mhm.
that would do that. And I have a couple ideas, but
Okay.
I think the other thing that we need to do is probably start settle on a date or some couple potential dates.
Yeah.
And I think that'll get everyone thinking, once we have a date, then everyone will,
Yeah.
figure out what has to get done to meet that deadline. So,
Yeah, let me just look at the calendar.
And
I
it's
mean, it
gonna
has
be a
to be in May
Zoom
sometime at
conference.
this point, at least 4 weeks out.
yeah, we can do a Zoom. I can host.
Zoom.
Um,
Yeah, like May 19th, the year after Mother's Day. When is Mother's Day? May 9th? Yeah, Mother's Day is May 9th, May 19th. Possibly anytime towards the end of May, I would think.
Wow, Mother's Day is early.
I mean, Steve, do you want to work with Carrie on getting a date? And then we can identify who has to.
Yeah.
We were going to have Jim or Emmeline available, right? So
Yeah, Jim and Emmeline, or maybe it's one or both, or.
yeah, we want to avoid the second and fourth Tuesdays of the month because they're
Yeah.
preoccupied.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, so let me work with Carrie and we'll send around a date or two.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Carrie, anything else? Any other update?
I'm just watching with great interest the two that are on construction on my street.
Yeah.
So it's been very interesting to see that going on.
Um,
Uh,
So,
Where's that, Karen?
um,
Where's
Urban-
that?
Excuse me, Helene, I didn't hear you.
Where are you?
I'm on Knollwood Drive,
Oh,
and there's one going on construction that's on us. It's very much in your face, kind of, and one that's behind. Both of these are very near me, so there's been a lot of construction on my street. Neither one, these are all for families, and that I is pretty sure is what most people are going to start out with ADUs with. They're not building them for rental right away. Maybe after family moves on, that will happen. But these, in this case, these are both for elderly family members.
Mark, during Glenn's presentation, Herb had sent a little chat note about naturally occurring affordable housing and how we can incorporate that. And at first, I didn't think we had any really, not nearly like Stratford.
ADUs.
But the ADUs, most of them, I think, would be affordable.
Mhm.
Those who are on the market, not for in-laws or family, might be beyond the affordable limit. But we have 150 or 250.
Around 200, roughly.
Yeah, so Glenn should make sure he incorporates some stuff on that.
At least some discussion on it, even though it may not. I mean, if you look on Craigslist and a lot of other places, there's loads of affordable housing available in apartments that were constructed in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and people, like our senior citizens, that isn't where they want to live. Now, people, but they are available in rentals for 1,800 and below. It's not that it isn't there, it's just not desirable in a lot of people's minds.
yeah, well, some of them involve like going up 3 flights of steps too.
Yeah.
And stairs, so.
For elders, that doesn't work.
Right.
Okay, let's move on to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
Yes,
How
I was hoping to run out the clock because I forgot to talk to the comptroller today or this week to get an update as to how much money we had in our Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I don't think it's changed substantially from where we were last month. We are still, unless they came in with the last week, but they probably haven't been deposited into our fund yet. We're waiting on a couple very large projects at the 2 universities that will contribute handsomely to the Housing Trust Fund. I'm pleased to say.
Will we get some money from the community theater construction?
That's not a building addition or new
No, but
construction. It's a
No, but I know, but
renovation.
yeah,
But
I know. But
we are Sacred Heart's building a new ice hockey arena,
right.
and Fairfield U is building a new convocation alumni hall, both of which are 40, 50, $60 million projects.
Mhm.
So if you do the math at 5 per 1,000, that's a pretty hefty check.
That's good. Well, so we have at least 650.
Correct. I will endeavor to get the correct amount tomorrow and then email it to the full committee. I apologize. I just forgot about it today.
Have you received any requests for funds?
I've received, I'm in conversations with 3 builders or property owners. One kind of fell off the grid a little bit. One that you're familiar with, who had approached this committee about a couple projects, properties that he owns, single family homes that he wanted to do something completely antithetical to our local zoning to build more than a single family on a single family lot. And I discouraged him from thinking about those because I just think that's not really what we're intending to do here. But he had another project with which was a commercial lot that he was interested in acquiring. And we had actually talked to somebody else about doing a modest size apartment building of sorts on that, like a 12 to 15 unit type deal. And a 3-story. It's a small lot, but it's located near the interstate, and it's been for sale for a while. So it was approved for a multi-story small office building. It never was approved, but never was built. So he had expressed interest in looking at that site and talking through, and in order to probably make the numbers work, he may need some level of subsidy, but I don't have, I need to see his development pro forma to see where the gap is in order for us to make an intelligent decision as to whether or not it's worthy of our participation or consideration. So I think he's still a ways away from that, but there is that conversation.
And the other two, nothing.
Well, the other one was a conversion into a duplex, which has kind of fallen off the wayside. And the third, which I thought was very viable, was converting a second floor office to residential use, a very small building, like 2,000 square feet on the second floor, converting that into like 4, apartments instead of the small offices that are there. And again, I told him what he needed to do, which is basically give us a site plan and floor plan, some numbers to look at in terms of what the costs are and where the gap is, and then we can have a conversation. And he hasn't done that yet. So I'll circle back with him, but there are those conversations out there as well. And I know I've talked, and I know you've talked to some of our nonprofit entities like Operation Hope that's done scattered site purchase, acquisition, and rehab. And I think that's still a very viable model, but they've been preoccupied trying to find a permanent home for their food pantry and office location. So I think that's what's taking up their time.
Well, the people that you've talked to, did they come to you because of something that's on your website?
They've I think a variety of things. They've heard about it, either through their grapevine or on the website or from news reports. But I know all 3 of them. So it's the word is getting out, I should say. We haven't done a lot of marketing, as you know, but the word is getting out to the development community that we're.
So yesterday I was at Walgreens on Kings Highway East, I guess, across from the empty automobile dealership there.
Yep.
And they've got a second story. I don't know why they have a second story. But could something like that be converted into apartments? If
I think that's a faux second story. I'm not sure it's actually usable. I have to look.
I'm just curious because somebody had talked to us about further down the road where the Dunkin' Donuts is, near where Kohl's used to be.
Yep.
That second story basically is empty, I think, and he wanted to do some apartments there, but he didn't have the parking.
Well, I wouldn't stop at the parking because, those types of, that's an offsetting use. If you think about the retail versus the second floor residential, they're offsetting parking demands really. So I would be interested in having a conversation on Kings Highway, 454 Kings Highway across the street from where you're talking about is a property that's for sale.
Mhm.
I've talked about, different options there as well.
Okay, good. Any other members?
Can I ask a question, Steve?
Yeah.
Has anyone ever taken into consideration taking these buildings like you're talking about with Walgreens or whatever and doing co-ops where the town maintains the property and the building itself, but sells inside of the walls at affordable rates?
Something similar, I think, is the whole Greenfield the duplexes, Mark,
They're not, it's not a co-op, that's a condo. And co-ops sometimes are hard to finance, but condos work. And I think it's certainly anything's viable. You probably don't want to work with a national like retailer. They're not going to want to do it, but
Well, you could, I'm
but other
basically talking
options,
about-
sure, why not?
Right, there's other options
Yeah.
if we have properties that we can buy or, and then make them into co-ops, so we still maintain the properties, so it goes towards our moratoriums.
Honestly, I'm willing to have a conversation with anyone, whatever their ideas are, if they have something that's a good idea. So, and bring it to you for consideration.
Right.
But I think we do need some baseline data. So if you're going to talk to me about the opportunity, I think it makes sense conceptually, but I need to see a plan, a site plan, and a
Right.
budget number, you know. So
I'm thinking more on places like strip mall type
Mhm.
places like that, like we did down on Washington Street in South Norwalk.
Mhm.
We did, you have the commercial, and then you have the co-ops upstairs. So I think that would be beneficial to a place like Fairfield that's not quite like Norwalk and like Stanford or anything like that, where everything fits right into how people want to live.
Mhm.
So I think co-ops for us would be an ideal situation because we still maintain that property. Or we still own that property, but in the confines of the apartments the people buy.
Right.
I'm wondering if we could structure a condominium that way too, that it's just a condominium on a leased plot.
Well, that's, yeah, you probably can do the same thing, but you would also be that whoever buys into that co-op, they also have a restriction as to how much they can resell it for.
Mhm. Well, that is the situation on Greenfield Nordstrom Street, except it's a condominium
Right.
development. So
Right.
the town owns the underlying property, ground leases it for 99 years for $1, and then the individual homeowners, they have a common wall, but they own the inside of their duplex.
Well, and I find that like when we had them, we had some like that, where, and you're talking about affordable or lesser income families trying to find a nice place to live. They tend to take care of a place more if they actually own their unit.
Mhm. Yep.
Okay, if you put out these affordable places or low income places and we're just renting them out without them having any type of ownership, a lot of times it goes by the wayside because they don't have a vested interest.
Yeah, it depends, but certainly I think that's one of the reasons why we try to solve the puzzle of affordable home ownership, because it does meet a need out there.
Right, but we also want to maintain our moratorium numbers. So if we still own properties, we'll always maintain that one specific.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we have the land control.
Right.
Because it's in perpetuity, right? So
Just
yeah, it's not a 40-year restriction that goes away in year 41, it becomes market rate. So
right. And about on ADUs, is the town able to make some sort of what was I going to ask? I'm writing these things down as I'm going along. Incentives like tax deductions in order to build. I would put an ADU on my property if I knew I could get a tax incentive.
yeah, our big issue with the ADUs, I mean, I think we have a much stronger argument with the RTM and others that might provide a tax break to incentivize development of ADUs if they counted towards a moratorium.
That's what I'm talking about.
And then there's the issue of, in order to get a moratorium for an ADU, does it need to be deed restricted for 10 years or 40 years? If it's a 10-year note or restriction, that's doable. A 40-year.
I had 10 years.
Is crazy.
10 years was my thought.
Well, there's
10 and
unfortunately,
15.
there's a difference of opinion. Well, I believe, as you do, that it's 10 years. Trumbull
Right.
believes it's 10 years. But the Department of Housing, there's at least some people up there that think it's a 40-year restriction. That's so it's not doable with a 40-year restrict. No one in their right mind would do that.
No one in
for
their
40
right
years.
mind is going to do that. I'll be dead by then, so it wouldn't matter.
So
to me,
I
but-
think we have to answer that question
Yeah.
before we can
Yeah.
get.
Yeah. Just
And
questions I
that's-
was writing down.
That's in the law, the discrepancy between the 10 and the 40, right? Those are two different
Right,
sections.
right. There are two
There are.
different sections, so we'd have to find out if that's even doable. At a 10 or even a 15 would be doable,
Um,
you know,
mhm.
but we'd have to figure out with them. All right, just questions I had.
All
Thank you,
Thank you.
Good
Joanne.
questions, Joanne. All right, moratorium, anything?
Well,
any
I
difference?
did make some, I sent out the most recent report updated through April. I did make a couple corrections and updates. You know, I think, and you know, this is a working document, so if you do see something that doesn't look right, just let me know. I started this initially just to track these developments I just wanted to understand what was going on in town. So this is the best way I could do that and be able to answer questions like this. But now it's become a public document. So, but in any event, you know, there are a couple projects that just started construction, 78 Uncle Place and 528 Black Rock Turnpike. And I updated that. And then we have a couple projects. 131 Beach was technically approved. It was approved with conditions such that I don't think that the developer, well, I know the developer is taking an appeal on this, so I don't think the developer's intent on abiding by those conditions under which the approval was granted. But, you know, I can't list it as proposed because there was a decision made. And I think, you know, there are a couple other minor corrections here. I will note that I did have a conversation with the attorney who is representing the town as it relates to the tax abatement language and deed restrictions for Operation Hope properties. And hopefully that will finally cross the T's and dot the I's so that we can turn those red points into black points. You know, I had included those housing unit equivalency points based on, you know, some fairly modest changes to the declaration of covenants for those units. Kind of low hanging fruit, but we do need to actually record the restrictive covenants in order for those points to count. So I'm happy to report that the town attorney has reached out to me and is working on those. So that's good news.
So if my math is correct, the units have been built and occupied and those under construction combine well beyond what we need. It'd be like 630 and we
Yep.
need 433.
Yep, we just need to get them completed and a certificate of occupancy issued, and then we can count them.
Yep.
And you know, the issue that it takes, you know, once you start construction, it's usually 12 to 15 months before you're at a CO. So we're still a ways away from counting those units. And, you know, one way we can get units faster is if we can identify and acquire and deed restrict existing housing, which doesn't require construction. It just requires us to find units for sale that we can make affordable through a deed restriction. So if you know of any, and
Hard to
you have
find.
it, let me know, because I think that's a way to get us there quicker.
Good. Last on the agenda is the meeting with Operation Hope. which we would like to do, but we got to find, they meet the same days that we meet. And because of COVID and it's just not as convenient to juggle things around, but we're still working on that. We'd like very much to get together with Carla and her board and talk about, she'll be part of the planning process for the update. I'm not sure, Mark, if we would put Glenn directly in touch with her and Operation Hope, or if we would collect information on his behalf.
I think that's to be determined, but I think it may make sense to have, selective interviews to kind of fill in the gaps, and Carla and her organization might rise to that level, where we might need some very specific information from her as to the issues that she sees out there. So, I think we can handle that as we go through this process.
Good. Let's see, is there any other old business? And if none, any new business? And if none, we can adjourn, noting that our next scheduled meeting is Wednesday, May 12th. But of course, we'll meet sooner than that if Mark needs us to do something on Quincy.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second it.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Helene. Great.
Thank you all. Great meeting.
It was a great meeting. Thank
Have a
you.
good night.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Steve.